Folks, what the crap's going on? Heir of Carthage here, and yes, we have another great matchup for you. This one also not on the grassy flatlands, so for those of you who are hoping for something a little different in terms of scenery, we get it. However, in terms of not being different, Getae is here again. These guys appear to be a popular theme in the battles, and this one's going to be another one from Sol Invictus. He's playing against... I think it's Sardinella. I may have gotten the name wrong. We'll see it at the end. And he's got Tylis, so a couple of good barbarian factions. Let's go through, look at the armies, and we'll talk a little bit about the factions. I'm going to slow it down just a little bit because we don't want to miss any of the fun action. There's 3 bow horsemen. Bringing the bow horsemen with Getae kind of seems to be like an auto pick for a lot of players, and it does make sense. They provide a really nice, fast-moving, high-damage missile component with pretty good range, too, because the horse archer is 125 versus Jav Kev. A bit shorter than that. There are some Dacian bowmen there. It looks like another one. So, and then a heavy skirmisher, another bowman. So I see 3 bowmen and 1 heavy skirmisher. So the heavy skirmisher is a javelin support. It's kind of a hybrid melee. And when we look at infantry, I see some noble swords. There are mercenary axe warriors, noble swords. So it's going to be noble sword again. So I think 4 noble swords. Then I see 1, 2 mercenary axe warriors, it looks like. We do have some spear warriors. Again, remember that the I'm going to call them Dacia, the Getae. The Dacian spears don't have javelins, which does make them a little bit different. There are also some spear horsemen, which are just kind of a nice, cheap, medium cavalry option for Dacia. Let's go take a look at Tylis. Tylis, another heavy barbarian faction in terms of... They do have good mid-tier swords, and they've also got good high-end swords. Tribal warriors are kind of their mid-tier option, even though they show up as a very heavy. They are a more defensive-focused barbarian unit than you typically see. Their melee attack is quite a bit lower. They still come with a whopping charge bonus at 26, but their armor and melee defense are spectacular, and then they also have the shield wall capabilities. So we're going to see a wall of tribal warriors here. They're going to be backed up by an Oathsworn general and led by a line of Celtic warriors. There are also some Celtic slingers up front. It looks like 4 of those in total, 1 on each flank, 2 in the middle. And then we're going to see some Levy Freemen guarding the flanks as well, those MLG Levy Freemen. Obviously a good pick. We got some raiding horsemen, which are a nice javelin cavalry with decent secondary melee against light targets. They're going to be kind of facing off against the bow horsemen. And then we've also got a couple of heavy cavalry here. We've got some noble horse, which is an excellent high-tier melee cavalry. It's also got pretty solid charge bonus for not being a shock cavalry, which comes in the territory of barbarian units. So Tylis has the capability to put up a very strong sword wall with high armor. They also have the ability to punch some damage down with Oathsworn and potentially with Noble Horse, depending on the situation. Their skirmishers are on the cheap end, but honestly, sometimes cheap skirmishers are the best skirmishers. Number 1, because they're there and shooting, and they occupy the attention of the enemy while costing you very little. So all of those things can be very good about the cheap skirmishers, although you won't necessarily be blown away by their stats, per se, right? We do have some aggressive skirmishing going on from the Dacians here. They're going to be picking at probably any unit they can get their paws on here. They're going to take a shot at that Celtic slinger. That's a nice job. Remember that any entity within this unit that dies, like this poor chap here rolled over on the ground covered in blood, he takes his ammunition with him. His buddies cannot kneel over and pick it up and use it. The ammunition goes with them. So every kill you put on the slingers means a potential stone not thrown your way later. And as the old saying goes, words may not hurt you, but sticks and stones certainly will, and there are plenty of sticks and stones within the Tylis army. So we're going to see the archers, it looks like, lining up for Dacia here. There are 3 bowmen coming up front. The spear warriors are in a blockier formation. Now remember that we've seen this before, and typically this is run for a couple of reasons. One, I think it helps a little bit with bracing in the right situation, but mostly it also causes a unit to overlap the flanks if it's spread wide, and so you end up with enemy units overlapping. Now typically that's not a good thing, but when you have javelin units and other things behind that are going to be tossing, it's a great way to lower your casualties and increase the casualties of the enemy. So it is certainly one reason why you might see cheaper units or spear units like this put into a blocky formation versus your standard wide spread formation. All right, so otherwise, it looks like the battle is Drawing closer, as far as the terrain here, neither player is going to get a massive terrain advantage. We do have some sloping going on here from the direction of Tylis, from right to left, opposite from the direction of Dacia. There is some wooded areas far flung out. Dacia is kind of hugging close to this wooded area here. Just be aware that when it comes to like wooded areas, it's not going to function exactly like Warhammer. There's been some changes made recently in Warhammer that kind of changed the behavior of wooded areas, which I actually really like, and I kind of hope that they find their way in to more games. I also, I don't recall whether walking through the woods hides units in Rome 2. It might. I'm always trying to remember, exactly when that came into play, but I have liked it ever since they did. I know it wasn't there in Shogun 2, like usually if you started walking, your unit became visible, unless it was a specific stock unit. But I love how in later games that without line of sight, and I know the line of sight thing plays a role in Rome 2, so I think the woods do as well, that if you don't have line of sight on the enemy, they move unseen, which I really, really do like that. It's a nice feature. Anyway, the Celtic Warriors are going to come under a little bit of fire here from the Dacian Heaven Bowmen, and that is indeed their focus. I guess they're looking to soften the initial front line. Then they're going to pull back because they've now been in range of the Celtic Slingers. Those Slingers get some nice shots there. They'll kill a couple of Bowmen. See how those Bow Horsemen are doing. You got 12 kills on one, 8 on another. Remember that kills may not be reflective of the damage dealt here. That's a stat that, again, we get in Warhammer battles that we do not get in these older games. Damage dealt could be quite different. And remember that even killing, a dozen, 8 to a dozen of a big infantry unit like these tribal warriors is going to make them very less effective in combat. Because again, we can't see the health bar of these units. We only see the count of soldiers in them because again, this just wasn't a thing like it is in the newer Total War games where you can see the health bar. So like this unit right now is definitely taking enough damage to start losing combat effectiveness very quickly. Now it doesn't mean they'll lose per se, it depends on what they're going up against, but as far as losing effectiveness, it's certainly begun. So you can see Tylis wants an engagement and Dacia doesn't. They've backed up into the woods here. It's going to give them a couple of advantages. It should give some of their infantry a little bit of cover. And then also, and cavalry charges, I believe, get slowed down in the woods as well. At least that's typically been the case in Total War games. So Tylis is going to push the issue here. If they get a good charge, this front line of Celtic warriors backed up by the tribal warriors is going to be very tough to break. And then the Oathsworn can help focus on some of the noble swords. The noble swords are definitely going to be a problem, though. They're better than the units here, but you do have numbers on your side. There was a bit of a feint there by the Spear Horsemen who called that off. And let's see whether Tylis continues to push. As you push, too, one of the challenges you can run into is the need to keep your line organized and watch out for counter charges. So as you get an aggressive push going, you have to be very careful that the enemy player doesn't get like nice charges into you, disrupt your formation, or catch you off guard. So see, like back here, these Celtic Slingers are lagging a bit. Maybe bait for the Bow Horsemen even. So it's just something to be aware of as you're moving up. It does take micromanagement and it can be a pain. This unit continues to take damage. This tribal warrior is significantly degraded at this point because of the Bow Horse damage. So again, that may not be directly shown there. That was a nice charge by those raiding horsemen. Caught some of the Bow Horsemen there, and it does look like some initial engagements are going to take place. The blocky spear units are used to fix some of the units for Tylis, and you can see here that Tylis kind of began to overcommit, and now they're pulling back from that as the Spear Horsemen charge forward. We're going to see these tribal warriors enter a shield wall, and then a nice counter charge here by the Celtic warriors to try and drive the Spear Horses back. So the initial engagement into the blocky formations, you can see that the Dacian player here just falling back and trying to wait until the right engagement time. There's another Spear Horse charge going down here, and it's going to be into the back of these Levy Freemen. Levy Freemen are decent against cavalry, especially with their javelins. They're not going to be amazing when getting charged in the back like that, so that was a nice charge to disrupt them, and then just bounces right over to the Slinger unit. So see here, a mistake made. And with these Levy Freemen tied down, they're not able to effectively get their javelins into that Spear Horse. Here comes some Noble Horse looking to counter the Spear Horsemen, and it looks like they will be countered. However, that's probably an attempt to kind of clear the way for these noble swords to get a clean entry into battle. There are 3 tribal warriors bottled up here. They're being surrounded by noble swords. So not a great place for those tribal warriors. The Oathsworn is moving into position, coming under bow fire. It's like tribal warriors here in trouble against the noble swords. This tribal warrior is definitely losing against the noble swords. However, there's a noble horse in the vicinity there. I wonder if they can put some charges down. The slingers are firing for Tylis still, and the bows are firing. Looks like the bows are targeting the Oathsworn general. The slingers appear to be firing at some of the Dacian bowmen. Noble horse charge here on the left flank of Tylis. However, this fight is kind of souring a little here. There's a lot of spears there for Dacia. There's mercenary axe warriors. And this noble horse is in over its head, now surrounded by multiple spear horse units, and there's another one in the vicinity. Tylis is going to use battle rhythm here to improve the rally to improve the morale of the troops there. Battle rhythm's a different one that's going to impact the melee attack, I believe. This spear horse looks like it is trying to fend off the noble horse. The noble horse does countercharge it, but then takes a volley of javelins here from the axe warriors. Very nice infantry and cav support going on for the Getae here. Oh, this is bad. So see, these slingers really need some time to keep working some damage, but they ended up getting left alone here, and the single spear horse is going to easily clear out all of these slingers. So this is a very bad situation for Tylis. Now, on the other hand, Tylis is trying to get to the archers. Their horse are very much more damaged than the spear horses, so that's going to be rough. This Oathsworn gets wrapped up in a fight long-term with some Axe Warriors, which is not really a great place for it because the Axe Warriors do decent AP, and the Noble Swords have now been given time to finish their fights against the Tribal Warriors, and we've seen Noble Swords get kind of crapped on in the last few battles, and here they're most definitely not getting crapped on. And I think some people maybe sometimes take the wrong opinion thinking that they're not that good. They are good units. How your engagement starts has a lot to do with how it's going to finish, and in a lot of these cases we had pretty darn good starts for the Noble Swords and sometimes less than favorable starts, but there was a few times where the Tribal Warriors had a good start. Like over here they had a much better start, and you can see that they're holding out much better against this Noble Sword. Now they're outflanked though, and the initial numbers of Tylis seeming much greater have now been whittled down through a lot of good cavalry use and rear charges, and so Tylis is struggling to put an end to the bleeding here. I mean, the Oathsworn General is trying to chop through these Axe Warriors, but again, look at these nice flank shots by the archers. Very good focus on an important target. These Celtic Warriors, who were meant as kind of a charging line, they were just very well disrupted early on by the cavalry and the spears. All of that disruption by the spear units of Dacia allowed the Axe units and the Noble Sword units to get the good engagements they needed, and it is paying off big time right now. So the four Noble Sword units are absolutely tanking on Tylis, and they're not going to be effective here. Now, a lot of people have always, I say a lot of people have always said, I should rephrase that because it's not accurate. Many people seem to have commented on the fact that sometimes players seem to be spending too much time skirmishing in the beginning of these Rome 2 battles instead of just going in there and getting into combat. Well, if you'll notice here, the Tylis player did not really spend any extra time skirmishing. In fact, the Tylis player pushed the engagement the entire time, and because they felt like they had the advantage. And in many ways, they did have an advantage in terms of the melee. They had more units. However, there was a quality advantage for sure here in this Noble Sword core. And so there was a nice quality bit here. The mobility advantage was definitely on the side of the Getae. They had more skirmish horsemen. They had more overall horsemen. And so that gave them a bit of an advantage, which ultimately translated to damage into the enemy slingers and lots of counter charges to infantry, which allowed his Noble Swords to get very clean engagements. Look at the effectiveness of the Noble Swords here. Still very many entities left in each unit, and they get a lot of kills. That tells you a lot about how effective this unit was allowed to engage. So essentially, you go and disrupt with cheaper units, and then you bring your elite infantry in afterwards to let it put the beat down on something. Now, how can you counter that? Well, obviously, you got to be watching for the enemy bringing in its cavalry to disrupt your infantry lines. You've got to try and use disruption tactics, such as your similar ones, such as was used by Sol Invictus here, right? Again, easier said than done a lot of times, but that is basically the idea that you have to kind of disrupt and fight back, and it becomes a micro-intensive game. And again, it's easier said than done. So it is interesting how a lot of these turn out that way, which is kind of whoever gets the best of some of those initial engagements typically will come out the victor. It doesn't always play that way, but in this case, it did. Yeah, the Tribal Warriors, again, very tough units, very defensive, not easy to cut through, but since the Noble Swords were given the engagement they needed, they got the job done. And the Axe Warriors, in this case, up against Tribal Warriors, are a solid pick because the Axe Warriors don't cost a lot, and they do nice armor-piercing damage against a highly defensive unit like the Tribal Warriors, and they're also going to be okay if they can get uncharged into an Oathsworn or something like that. Not something they necessarily would win, but they would end up causing an outsized chunk of damage. Anyway, hope you all enjoyed this. Yet another fun battle from Sol Invictus. Appreciate him submitting that. I've got battles from other folks, and then of course there's the special stuff I mentioned that Sol was working on. What I'm going to do is get to some battles from some other folks as well over the next few, and then I'll start taking a look at the special stuff that I've gotten from Sol, and we'll keep moving on, and we'll continue to have some Rome 2 content here. Hope you all are enjoying it. HeirofCarthage, signing out for now.